I'll call the Apache Junction City Council work session to order. Roll call.
Mayor Insulaco.
Here.
Vice Mayor Eck.
Here.
Councilmember Barker.
Here.
Councilmember Deeds. Here. Nice to have you back. Councilmember Surdy.
Here.
Councilmember Severs.
Here.
Councilmember Wilson.
Here.
All members present, you have a quorum, Your Honor.
We have a presentation, discussion with Representative Pete Rios. Is he here yet? No, he's not here yet. Let's skip that. Go back to that. Discussion on City Council residency. Mr. Hoffman.
Your Honor, Council directed at your last meeting that this be placed on the agenda, and it's on for your discussion.
Would anybody like to discuss this matter?
I asked for it to be on, Your Honor, because of the complaints we've had from citizens and that about Councilman Severs. He's certain he's a resident. I don't know. But honestly, I was doing it so Joe could prove his residency and we could bring this to some type of a closure. I don't know what we want to do with it. If anybody else has any feelings on it?
Anybody else?
How
Mr.
Joe
Severs?
feels on it.
I have plenty to say on this.
Okay.
Yes, my house is up for sale. I put it up for sale back in January. I am hoping to sell my large house and move into a smaller house. One of the first things that I did when I put my house up for sale was go and talk to our city attorney. Wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing anything wrong, make sure that I am acting within the law, make sure that I'm representing this community in the best way that I can and doing everything right. When I talked to Joel, I asked him, what are the rules here on this? He explained to me that if I do not have residency in Apache Junction anymore, then I must resign as a council member. And I said, what's the definition of residency? And like Joel always does, here's several pages that defines residency. And several areas here are outlined. And it states that there is no definitive answer of residency. There are certain things to be looked at, and it's handled on a case-by-case situation. But the biggest thing is the intent of the councilman. Just so everybody knows, I do still have a residency here. My primary residence is at 1184 North Star Road. I do live in it. I've got a couch, a bed, table and chairs, glasses, alcohol bottles, clothes, jewelry.
I won't tell everybody.
A refrigerator. There's not much that a single person needs to live in a house. My mail goes to my address. My driver's license is in Apache Junction. Here is SRP receipts in Apache Junction for my electric bill. My Cricket phone bill, I don't have a home phone, I have a Cricket cell phone, goes to Apache Junction. Here is my AT&T. This was for what phone bill I used to have. AJ landfill receipts, because I do still use the AJ landfill. I have water bills. My voter registration card is still in Apache Junction. My driver's license is in Apache Junction. My video card is in Apache Junction. If that is not enough, they look at the intent of the councilman. My intent is not to get slandered 3 to 4 days a week in the newspaper. My intent is not to make $682 a month for the amount of harassment that I have put up with. My intent is not to have my wife spied on, to be followed, to have photographs taken of me, to try to see if I am visiting my wife or if I live somewhere else. I find it really disturbing that certain people are looking in my wife's windows to try to see me there. This is an absolute invasion of privacy. My intent has been and always will be to protect the rights of the citizens of Apache Junction. That's what I do, that's what I've done before I was elected, and to this day. If my house sells tomorrow, and I hope it does, then I'll get an apartment until I get my other house back. My intent is to fight for the people of Apache Junction. That's what I'm here for, and I think that the people of Apache Junction know that.
Is there anybody else?
I do have some more.
Okay?
Joel, you are a city attorney. What is your ruling on this paperwork about my residency in Apache Junction? I would like to hear it on the record in front of the people once and for all.
Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, Mr. Sievers, I work for all 7 of you. You are my bosses. I would have a conflict of interest if I were asked to opine on any individual's residency, any one of you council members. I was asked by Mr. Sievers to explain the issue of residency. I did, and I gave him some case law. I gave him some statutes like I would of any one of you if you had come to me. And that's what I did. So it'd be difficult to say, oh, you are a resident or you're not a resident. It's essentially up to a judge if an action is filed. I cannot file it. It is an ethical dilemma for me. I could not file against my client. I could be disbarred for that, and I will not do that. Even if you ordered me, I would not file against a council member myself. I would send it out to whoever you wanted it sent out to. That included the Attorney General's office. I would do that. But I would not send it out. Or I'm sorry, I would not do it myself. I could not. So a judge would decide what all the elements are. And you're right, it's a case-by-case decision or situation. And a judge would decide, okay, is the driver's license enough? Well, what about the, you mentioned utility bills, you mentioned trash pickup, you mentioned a few other things that seems to indicate that you are a resident. But once again, it would be an action in court. The only way a term could be vacated would be by a Superior Court judge. That is how that is done. And that's it when it comes to residency.
Joel, I'd like to read a few things here that you highlighted. The residence of a person is that place in which his habitation is fixed and to which he has the intention of returning to when absent. A person does not lose his residence by leaving his home to go to another county, state, or foreign country for a temporary purpose with the intentions of returning. A person does not gain a residence in any county into which he comes for merely temporary purposes without the intention of making that county his home. The place where a person's family permanently resides in his residence unless he is separated from his family, but if it is a place of temporary establishment for his family or for transient purposes, it is otherwise. Everything that is just highlighted right there states exactly what is going on with me right now. This ordinance, that is our ordinance, that we go by right now, states that I am a resident of Apache Junction. And I'm a little discouraged that you can't say that based on our ordinance and the paperwork that you gave me. As well, you should do for anybody on this council. It doesn't matter that you have 7 bosses. It matters what is legal and what is not. And right here in black and white states that I live in this community.
And Mr. Sievers, I've always gone by the law. Whatever the result of the law is, that's the result. And the law in this case is I would have a conflict of interest to opine on such matter. That would be with any council member. I cannot do that The only way to do it is if someone would file an action, you would defend yourself with those elements or with that case. And if they have enough, they would try to convince the judge otherwise. But the law is, I would have a legal conflict of interest. I could be disbarred for that, for making that kind of opinion.
Okay.
Joel, this is on the agenda for direction to staff for tomorrow night. We can handle it then, right? Or what?
I believe it is.
Okay.
Okay, I have a couple other things here. I am tired of being questioned on how many nights I sleep in my house, as if that defines residency or not. So, ever since all this began, I've been keeping a log of it. On the 1st, I stayed at my home. I had a campfire and I had company. On the 2nd, I stayed at my home. I had another campfire and company. Chip Wilson attended one of my campfires this month at the place where I live. On the 3rd, I was at home at 11 o'clock at night. I left at 4 a.m. Tuesday and Wednesday, I was in Hollywood, but Wednesday night, got home at midnight. Stayed in my home again. Today is the 17th. Out of 17 days this month, I have slept in my house for 9 days. Does that determine residency? There's no number of days that I have to sleep in my home.
That's correct. There is no number of days. Once again, it's a matter of all the facts taken together.
That's right.
And I don't know if the answer you'd like me to say is you're a resident. But once again, I cannot make that opinion. And it would be based on all the facts that you're talking about and any facts that someone else would want to bring in.
I understand. When I built Sevilla nightclub, I lived in Las Vegas for 8 weeks. I came home for council meetings. When I built Venus in Las Vegas, I stayed there for 2 weeks. I came home for council meetings. When I built the Library Bar and Grill, I slept there for 6 weeks. I came home for council meetings. This was all before my house was for sale. What is the difference between then and today?
There is an attorney general position that talks about temporary, not living in the community, and the intent is to come back. I think that was a school district case.
Right.
And so you're correct. There is that kind of evidence that could be presented at such a court of appeal, Superior Court hearing.
Okay. If there's nothing else, we'll go on.
That's why the item is on, Joe. So.
I understand that.
Presentation and discussion with Representative Pete Rios of the Arizona State House of Representatives. Topics of interest, Apache Junction. Pete. Good evening, Pete.
Mayor, Councilman, pleasure to be here with you. Can I move this keyboard? Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you for the invitation to spend a few moments with you all. It's always a pleasure to speak and address the mayor and council of Apache Junction, because I believe that Apache Junction has one of the brightest futures of any city or town in the state of Arizona. I mean, you have the potential of being one of the largest communities in the state of Arizona, especially with the Superstition Vistas. And my hope is that you all take your time, plan, work with State Land Department, and make this one of the most beautiful areas of the state of Arizona. Let me talk to you very briefly about some issues that I've been working on and some pieces of legislation that are moving through the legislature that will have an impact on cities and towns throughout the state of Arizona. First of all, one of the major issues that we all have in Pinal County is highways and freeways. But if you all look at who makes the decisions as to where those dollars are going to be spent, you'll find that those major decisions, both for state dollars and federal dollars, are made by the State Board of Transportation. Pinal County has a member on the State Board of Transportation, but we share that membership with Graham and Gila County. The term of office is 6 years. So that means that Pinal County only has a representative on the State Board, I said education, of Transportation, only has a member on the State Board of Transportation once every 12 years. We have our own voice. Not to say that when we have a representative from Gila or when we have a representative from Graham that they don't do a good job necessarily in representing Pinal County. but we are one of the fastest growing counties in the nation. I believe we should have a full-time member on the State Board of Transportation from Pinal County. I had introduced this bill last year. I moved it out of the House, and it was stalled in the Senate. And it was stalled in the Senate because there was an amendment put on it that if we got another member, then Maricopa County would get another member. So at that particular point in time, most of the rules said, no way, no how, sorry, Pete, but we can't move your bill. This time, the bill is moving out of the State Senate and scheduled for a vote tomorrow for third reading, which means once we vote it, it goes to the Senate. And it's clean. It basically says that once Pinal County reaches a population of 500,000, because that's roughly what Pima County was at when they got their own representative, then we will get our own representative full-time, and we will create a new district, and we will pull out from Graham and Gila County's district, and we'll have our own. So it's basically a clean bill. So my hope that it is, that this time it'll go through the whole process. That way we can have a voice in how those millions and billions of dollars are spent. The other issue that you're might be interested in is there's a bill moving through the process that would require Area C of Pinal County, the rest of it, to also participate in vehicle emission testing. You all are part of Area A, and that happened a number of years back, maybe 11 years ago, where Apache Junction, Gold Canyon, and parts of Queen Creek, Johnson Ranch, were included in Area A. So you've been participating in vehicle emission testing now for a long time. Problem was that the state, through the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, never granted you folks a facility for testing. You all had to drive 15, 17 miles into Maricopa County to get vehicles tested, even further for residents of Gold Canyon. Most recently, we broke ground in January. Mayor, you were there. Some of you were there as well, to build finally an inspection station for you all. Took me and others about 10 years to get that done, fighting and fighting year after year. So now they want to bring in the rest of Area C, which would be Coolidge, Eloy, Casa Grande, Florence, Maricopa, the rest of Johnson Ranch, into the same program. The problem is that there's no vehicle emission inspection stations. I have opposed that legislation, not because I don't want clean air for the state of Arizona. In Pinal County, especially that particular area, we have a pollution problem, but it's not ozone. We have a dust problem. And checking the tailpipe of a Chevy pickup truck is not going to do anything to curb our dust problem. Water trucks will. But again, that's another piece of legislation that's moving through the process. And just so you can envision the newly created Area C, if you draw a line directly south from Queen Valley to the end of Pinal County, everything west of that would be Area C. So you have Area A for emissions, which is Maricopa County. You have Area B, which is Pima County. And then you would have Area C, which is half of Pinal County. So that's another piece of legislation that I thought you might be interested in and want to keep track of. Let me talk a little bit about HERF funding. HERF funding, we're still in budget negotiations. It seems like we've been in budget negotiations forever. We have not solved the 08 budget deficit. So clearly we haven't even been addressing the 09 budget, and there's going to be a bigger hole, a huge deficit for 09 as well. One of the proposals is to shift $100 million from HERF funding to Highway Patrol, to fund the Department of the Highway Patrol out of those monies. What does that mean for you all? It means you take $100 million out of the pot that cities and towns would not get in distribution. I've been in discussions where we have reduced that to $50 million. I've been in discussions where we have reduced it to $31 million. And I've been in other discussions where it's a zero shift. And that's what I would like to see, is a zero shift from HERF funding. Because otherwise, we hurt a lot of cities and towns and counties, and you've got your own problems already. We don't need to add to them. So at the end of the day, I can't tell you what's going to come out of those budget negotiations. But that is one area that would hurt you all. Another bill that you may be interested in is, you've heard in the past of attempts to try to close the training center in Coolidge. That used to be the Children's Colony. That is where there's still 131 developmentally disabled residents. And they're there because their loved ones or their conservator or whoever has been assigned by the court to be responsible for them, that's where they want them. They don't want them in group homes in Phoenix or in Tucson or anywhere else. Ever since I got into the legislature in 1983, I've been fighting against the closure of the training center. Well, there's a bill before us again that would do exactly that. We defeated that in our Appropriations Committee last week, came back again. It was held again because the votes simply aren't there. When people realize what this piece of legislation would do to 131 residents, they basically don't want to do it. The selling point for the proponents of the bill, and it's a Representative McComish from Ahwatukee that's pushing it, is that he wants to sell the property, which is state land, and make money to help solve the 08 problem. My question is, this is the worst economic time to try to sell real estate. We don't want to move 320 acres of state land and give it away, because basically that's what we would be doing. And we couldn't do it fast enough to help with the 08 budget deficit anyway. But more importantly, what happens to those 131 residents, some that had been there for 40 and 50 years, and that's the only home they know. So if you're going to disrupt these people and uproot them, I don't know how many of them would survive the adjustment to a new group home, especially in the city when they're not used to that. So, I mean, that's an issue that's there, so I mentioned that in case you're interested. Let me cover 3 bills real quickly, and then I'll open it up for questions. One of the bills is currently moving through the process, and it was voted out of the Appropriations Committee this past Wednesday on a 9-6 vote, with mostly the majority party supporting it and the minority party voting against it, is a bill entitled, and it's House Bill 2641, and it's entitled Urban Revenue Sharing Tax Credit. Sounds good, until you look at it. What that bill wants to do is to give a tax credit to taxpayers who reside in unincorporated areas of the county. The projections for how much of a tax credit this would be is upwards of $70 million annually. What does that mean? That means that revenue sharing to cities and towns would be reduced by $70 million, because this money would go to taxpayers in unincorporated area. The argument being, why should they be paying these taxes when they don't live in incorporated cities or towns? We counter, these people visit incorporated cities and towns to do their shopping, to buy vehicles, etc. They use the roads. They should be helping pay the freight. But again, that bill is moving, and if it sneaks through, my hope is that the governor will veto it, but we're not quite there yet. But again, revenue sharing would be reduced by $70 million if that bill goes through. There's another bill, House Bill 2637, that would prohibit municipal taxation of services. This is a bill introduced by Representative Murphy, Representative Russell Pierce, and Representative Kirk Adams, and this would preempt municipalities from imposing the TPT, transaction privilege tax, or similar tax on professional, business, or personal services. Again, that passed out of the Appropriations Committee last Wednesday on a 9-6 vote. For us that voted against it, that's a local decision that needs to be made by local government if they want to tax those services or not for the state to be making that decision. One more bill, and then I'll open it up for questions, and this is House Bill 2585, general obligation bond requirements by Representative Yarborough and Representative Rick Murphy. And the bottom line is that this would reduce the city's ability to issue bonds for infrastructure. They're trying to put restrictions on what cities and towns can bond for. So again, these are things that the state of Arizona doesn't like when the federal government tries to do it to the state. But yet, the state doesn't think about cities, towns, or counties when they do it to you. So these are pieces of legislation that can really, really hamstring local government. So again, these are at least 3 bills that I want you to keep an eye on, because we may need your help later on down the line if they get through and we want a gubernatorial veto. There's some Senate bills that are just as bad, but Senator Rebecca Rios will be addressing you later. I'll let her cover those, and with that, I'll open it for any questions you may have.
Any questions for Pete? Rick?
Pete, on House Bill 2585, what's their reasoning for restricting the bond requirements?
Their rationale was that they basically wanted to modify the requirements for levying and the issuance of government general obligation bonds, because they believe that we in the state of Arizona are paying a lot of money in debt service. So by restricting you, I mean, if you look at what we're going through right now, and the reason we haven't been able to resolve the budget problem is because the governor, the Democrats are insisting that we need to go and issue school bonds for school construction. Right now, we in the state of Arizona are spending from $300 to $400 million every year to build new schools. We're saying, you know, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. So we want to get into the bonding. So not only do they not want to get into bonding for school construction, and I think at the end of the day they will, because there's really few options available, they also want to restrict other political government entities from using bonding as much.
Well, it doesn't make sense, since it's not a burden to the state, it's a burden to the city to repay those bonds and to take, you know, I mean, a lot of small cities, that's the only way they can get roads and infrastructure put in. It just seems pretty ridiculous when it has no effect on the state whatsoever.
Yeah. And one of the entities that you would have to address that issue to, I'm sure you've heard of ATRA, Arizona Tax Research Association. That's where it's coming from.
That's it.
I knew it. Had their
Ari?
fingerprints all over it.
Pete, I was curious, do you know what the trust pool's at now for the schools with the state trust land? There's supposed to be the pool there, and then the interest is given supposedly to schools annually. Do you know what that pool's at? Last I heard, it was like $850 million, you know.
And I haven't checked, you know, Councilman X, so I would be guessing if I threw a figure out there.
I was just curious what they get up, you know, what is the schools are getting from that. And you seem to mention the same names there, a couple of representatives. Do they live in towns or cities?
Well, I mean, Russell Pierce is from Mesa, so I think that's an
Does
incorporated
this city
city last time I
know?
checked.
I always wonder if the cities know what their representatives are doing to them, or, you know, why these same names keep coming up in the House, and then they're in the Senate 2 years later or 4 years later.
That's where it's going next year, supposedly.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Is
do they
it-
know? Sure they know. I mean, the league knows who the sponsors of this legislation are, and they sit down, they talk to them. But if you know, and I have a lot of respect for Representative Russell Pierce, but if you know Representative Pierce like I know Russell Pierce,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter who talks to him. I mean, he's got what he's going to do, and he's going to move forward, you know, and that's what he does.
Yeah.
Jeff?
You said our population's getting big enough that we'd have our own transportation representative. Wouldn't that also mean that we'd be big enough to have 5 county supervisors and would have better representation that way also?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we're beyond the figure of 250,000 in population. Once we hit that figure at the next decennial census, the requirement is that that county go to 5 districts.
Do you know how it would be separated?
I have no idea. That's going to be one heck of a political process. I mean, I've been involved in redistricting at the state level on 3 different occasions, 2 different occasions, because I came in 83, we did redistricting in 90, then again in 2000. And it's basically the 3 county supervisors meeting with a lot of people that do a lot of stats and holding public hearings throughout the county, getting input, because things that they're going to look at is communities of interest. They're going to look at contiguity. They're going to make sure, or try to make sure, that areas are adjacent to each other, where there isn't any, skipping around or connecting by one road or a sidewalk, or because I've seen legislative districts in the 80s that were connected that way. But that'll be a long process, but it'll be a public process, so the public will have input as well.
Anybody else? Pete, a couple of weeks ago when we were down to the League of Cities and Towns, and your daughter Rebecca brought this up about the Coolidge home. Isn't that the same person that brought it up last time? Isn't he the same?
There's a gentleman.
The same guy brought the same bill up twice?
There's a gentleman that owns, and these are called intermediate care facilities / for MR. The term hasn't been changed, unfortunately, but stands for mentally retarded. We need to update some of those terms to be more politically correct. But nevertheless, the majority of residents in the Coolidge facility require that type of a facility because it's 24 hours, 7 days
Care.
supervision, yeah. And there's 3 of them in the state of Arizona. The biggest one is one that's in Ahwatukee, called Hacienda de Los Angeles, of the Angels. And they would stand to probably benefit the most if the training center in Coolidge was closed, because 60 to 70 of those residents would be placed there. They charge $500 a day for care. So you multiply that times 30 days in a month, we're about $15,000. Times 12 months, there's a lot of money there. So some of us are arguing, is this being proposed for the right reasons, or is it because somebody stands to make a lot of money?
To make a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know, I've been by it, I guess we've all been by it. It's such a nice facility for these people to live in.
The thing of it is that these are folk, like I said earlier, where their loved ones, parents, and some of these parents are still alive, because I met with about 6 of them today, and they're very, very scared because they don't want their young ones moved. Or their fiduciary, conservator, they don't want to move. They made the decision that that's where they ought to be. There's a Supreme Court decision that goes back to 1970 sometime. It's called the Olmstead Act, which basically says for developmentally disabled persons, we need to try to put them in the least restrictive environment, okay? And I agree with that. I wouldn't argue that for a minute, which means either somebody's home or a group home or a facility like Hacienda. People say that if a facility is run by the state, that it's an institution. So once you use that word, there's these images that come to people's mind, like one flew over the cuckoo's nest, you know? Mm-hmm. But if anybody that's ever been to the training center, it's not an institution. They're basically cottages, they're small group homes. Those folk are well taken care of. They have resources there that other DD clients do not have in the community. They have a doctor there that comes in every day for those residents. They have a shop where they make the adaptive appliances for the wheelchairs or whatever they need. They make it there on the grounds. So they have a dental college that goes there. For anybody that needs dental work, they do it there on the grounds free of charge, because it's training for those students that are going to be dentists. My hope is that it could be used as a resource center where other DD clients that are not there could utilize that facility for the same purpose. But again, we've got a battle on our hands again, and we'll see what happens.
That's a shame. that
Any more
you're
questions for Pete?
Still battling the same issue.
I do, and only because I work with our lobbyists. The Area C issue, it's being looked at to expand it for Pinal County. What about the west side for Maricopa County? Is there any intention to,
If there is, I haven't seen it, because one of the issues that I raised during debate on this particular piece of legislation was, okay, if we have a dust problem, but we're going to have to check our vehicles, I know Yuma has a dust problem as well. Why don't we include them as well? So the representatives from Yuma didn't like that comment, but I did it intentionally because they were supporting the bill. But nevertheless, no, as far as going into western Maricopa County, I haven't seen that piece of legislation. But do realize that Area C came into existence last year, and the only thing that Area C had to comply with is to use clean burning fuel in the winter. And the supervisors, the mayors from those communities agreed, yes, we'll do that. If you think that's going to help with the ozone problem, we'll do that. We'll use clean burning fuel in the winter months. So they had agreed to that. But now, one person decided, no, you got to have vehicle emission inspection as well. And that was Representative Barnes, who was the chairman of the Environment Committee in the House. So it's his bill. It didn't come from DEQ. DEQ is not promoting this particular piece of legislation. But again, when you're in the majority, you've got an idea, and you've got the votes, you can push it a long ways. So I don't know where the executive is on this piece of legislation yet. Like I say, it's just, it'll be voted tomorrow in the House. I think the votes are there to get it out. We'll see what happens to it in the Senate, and then go from there.
Was this brought in just to help the state's overall average with the federal government to meet certain standards, bringing in
Volume.
That's exactly why this is happening.
Yeah,
This
bring
is
down,
exactly
instead of
why
taking
Area
care
C
of
was
what's going
created.
on over here.
I mean, it's to help with the Maricopa pollution problem.
Yeah,
To bring the
that
numbers down.
average down to where we meet the federal regulation
You cover
standards.
more square miles, so you can say this, dirty air is spread out more, so it's reduced. But in all reality, the problem is in the valley. We have a huge problem in the valley. That's where it needs to be addressed. And as we grow in Pinal, and the town of Maricopa, I remember there were 4,000 people there in the year 2000. I think they're up to 34,000 now. And if they keep growing and get huge, well then, yeah, we have to take a real close look at that, but not today. That's something that somebody can do in the future when it really becomes an issue. Again, let me thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
I do have one other thing, Mr. Rios, and that is the issue you said about Superstition Vistas. And I hope you're aware of the concerns we have about Maricopa County communities coming across the line into Pinal County. And I think you support us on that as far as we feel like we're part of Pinal County. And I know both candidates for Mesa's mayor mentioned coming across the line, coming across Meridian. And I'm just curious how you feel about that.
It's Pinal County.
Yeah.
I mean, we have boundaries for a reason, and that's why we have a boundary between Pinal and Maricopa County. And my hope is that those political subdivisions in Maricopa County would respect Pinal County and allow Pinal County to do the planning for Pinal County in those areas as well. And maybe we'll need to visit with the mayors again and try to convince them of that, or work with state land department or flood districts or whoever else is involved to try
All the above.
to get the time, to allow Pinal County to do what it is that they need to do for their county. And again, I thank you for allowing.
Thank
me
you for
to
giving us
have a
your
few
time,
minutes.
Pete.
Okay,
Thanks.
y'all have a good meeting.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Your Honor. You never looked my way when, on the last thing. Will there be more discussion on the residency tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm still.
Presentation and discussion on city council work plan objective relating to customer service enhancement area. Matt.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Matt Busby, one of the assistants to the city manager. I've been asked to present to you tonight an update on one of your city council work plan items. You may be familiar with this document that I'll have up on the screen. This green summary document, which was an Excel spreadsheet that summarized your work plan items for this year. Right here in the middle there, you'll see customer service enhancement through technology. In the work plan, that's the update I want to give you tonight. You should have a packet in front of you as well that has the slides. If you want to have any questions, there's notes pages, things like that. The first thing I want to discuss is the new website. You may remember the other assistant too, Ruth Giese, gave a presentation a little while back about the new website. I just want to give you a little bit of a refresher and kind of help you understand how that's really helping customer service and helping our residents. First of all, there's job postings online now. There's news releases, council video and agendas, so the videos of all the council work sessions and city council meetings. And we have this great feature called notifying email updates. For any of those 3 items above on that list, and also for emergency alerts, residents of the city can type in, or anyone for that matter, can type in their email address on the web page and get notified whenever there's updates to any of those things. And just to give an idea of how much these are being utilized, about 670 people have signed up for updates on the job postings. You know, the city has about 250 employees or something like that. So a lot of people are interested in working here. That's a great service to the community, I'd say, for those people who are interested in that. Moving on, there's fax pages. Fax stands for frequently asked questions. Nearly every department's webpage has a little box on the side. It has 2 or 3 questions in there that are commonly asked. So residents, if they're visiting the web pages, can click on that and get that answer immediately. So that's a great feature as well. Each department has their own web page. There's the ability to do surveys, opinion polls. It's not a scientific survey by any means, but it is a chance for residents to get on the web page, let their voice be heard, participate in that way. So that's another great feature about the website. We have a webcam, so those who aren't familiar with Apache Junction can see our surroundings, one of our greatest assets. It pans out over the superstitions there, so it's a great tool for customer service as well. It's free. That's always a great benefit to customers, and it's 24/7. So, for example, on the videos of the council meetings, those people who can't attend on Tuesday nights, if they want to watch the council meeting at 1 a.m., they could, and it's a great tool for those people who want to participate but may not have the time to come to meetings or whatever the case may be. So overall, what is the customer service benefits of the website? Ultimately, it's a more informed public. They're the taxpayers that pay for the city services. They should be able to be informed about whatever information they need or want. So this website is a real quick, easy way, a couple clicks of the button, they can find numbers, contacts to call, anything like that. It's a great customer service. It makes it easier for their voices to be heard because they can contact those necessary people, and allows them to participate more in the government because they have all that information right at their fingertips and real easy to sort through. Now I'll go through some of the departments. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to update you some of the statistics about the website, and this is really great. In February alone, there were 2.2 million hits on the webpage. Now that's not people visiting, but that's how many clicks on the links on each webpage where they went. But that's a lot of hits in different ones.
Tremendous.
And there's estimated 54,000 visitors on the webpage. Now there's only 37,000 residents. 54,000 people visit the webpage. So that's a really great tool for customer service enhancement. You can see the numbers since January. So through January to the current, 4.4 million hits, 112,000 visitors, an average of 70,000 hits a day. It's really being used, and it's a great tool. And then video of the council sessions. There's been 6,000 successful streams. Now you think this room maybe holds 40 or 50 people, maybe not even that much. 6,000 people are watching those videos. Now I'll go through some of the departments, what they're doing. Public safety, they've had some great technological improvements. One is an in-car reporting tool. This allows the officers out in the field to take notes after the scene of the crime or whatever, while things are still fresh in their mind. They have that ability to take notes and for their reports later, and even start on their reports right there. So they don't have to wait till 4 hours later on the shift to go back to the department and write up those reports. And ultimately, that's a time efficiency for officer. It allows them to stay out on the streets more, helping the residents of the city. You remember also the 800 megahertz radio system, improved communications, clear communications, wider coverage, ability to encrypt or secure the messages when needed. And it's also compatible with Mesa PD, and it can be compatible with anyone else on an 800 megahertz system. So that's another way to broaden that customer service level. Moving on, public safety again. We had an exercise, you may remember, for the pandemic flu emergency exercise. This was a great chance to bring all that technology together and practice, communicating with the departments, with the county, and see how all that would work. So that emergency operations center was put in PD at that practice session, and we were able to go through those steps. And public safety is doing a lot of investigative tool enhancements as well. That'll help them in a lot of their investigations and things like that. So moving on to the library now. I don't know if any of you heard this, but a couple times this year already we've hit, I think it was over 2,000 people visiting the library in one day. That is a lot of people coming through that library. And they're really improving a lot of their technology to help that flow of that many people. They have this automated check-in and check out with the radio frequency identification, which is the RFID you see there. So when they drop off books, it immediately checks in. They can check out more items when they go in to visit. They also added an additional 2 checkout stations, automated checkout stations, where you just put the books under a barcode. They're out the door. They don't have to wait in line for a customer service clerk or anything like that. They added additional computers, updated the software, expand the wireless capabilities. So a lot of stuff they're doing to help these people who want to use these resources and use that knowledge that you find at the library. The Water District also has done some improvements. They have the ability for online payments now. 24/7, someone can pay their water bill. They have approximately 1,100 people using that right now, and that's a great success as well. They can also check the history of their water consumption and also their payments. So that's been great for the customers. And they have a new phone system that matches the city's current system, so that helps with communication well. It's a lot more reliable than the one they have. The city clerk, this is the last part I'll discuss. Notice agenda. All the city council agendas are now online. This allows all the public to be able to see before the council meeting what's coming up, what are they talking about. And that's also linked with the video stream. I don't know if you've seen it, but the video is up on the screen. It also has the agendas next to it so they can follow along. And any attachments to the agendas are also there. They have the ability to pull those up. And of course, the self-sales tax collection has been a big, exciting project. Ultimately, that helps us minimize errors in the sales tax collections. It used to go through the Department of Revenue. Now it goes straight to us, and we can take care of that here.
Can I add something to that? Because it just happened the other day. We've had our license forms online for a while, but people could only download them, fill them out, and mail them in. As of last Thursday, we have a fillable form on the website now, and within 30 minutes, we had our first application.
So they can type it in right there
Yes.
while they're looking online and submit it right there.
That's not the tax payment, that's the license.
Yeah. So it's things like that. It's about creating ease for the residents of the city, enhancing that customer service so we can get them their services more efficiently and in a timely manner. Now I'll give you real quick some of the future technology improvements on the near horizon. Parks currently has a software system called RecWare. They want to expand that to allow online registration for classes. That'll be a great tool if people can't come down and register at the parks during the day. After they put the kids to sleep, they can, 9 p.m. at night, sign up for classes at parks. So it's a great service tool there. Development Services has a, has a lot of stuff going on as well. The geographic information systems they're hoping to get soon online. That combines essentially mapping with data. It streamlines their processes, real paper intensive right now. It'll help Real ease of use. They can click on an area map and all that data comes up, whatever they need for their analysis and everything they do. Also the Tidemark software, this is more electronic record keeping. Again, it'll streamline those paper processes, those paper-heavy processes that can slow staff down. All this stuff will help them improve their customer service and time efficiency. City Code Volume 2, the zoning code, is going online. And also they're working on a building permit process webpage. That came up last time we discussed about the webpage. They'll be able to show on a webpage the process people need to go through to get their building permits. City Code is going to be on. The webpage is going to have a request tracker. Essentially, people will go online, type in their complaints, or if they want to compliment city staff for their good work too, anything like that, they can send on there. It'll automatically be assigned to the appropriate department. And a great feature about it, the citizens can actually track where that item is at. So if it is a complaint, well, they can see what department it's forwarded to and what the status is of it. And Animal Control is hoping to get some software that'll help with all their new code changes as well. And lastly, you've heard a lot about this. I won't spend too much time. The City Human Resource Information System, automated payroll system. This is really going to, again, streamline processes, help staff get away from that paper-intensive stuff that requires a lot of time, and streamline that so they can focus more on what they're supposed to do and serving the residents of the city. And with that, that's all I have to update with.
Any questions for Matt?
Any questions?
I would just compliment on the process. I can remember getting my first permit and asking questions about it, and at that time, 12, 14 years ago, and they couldn't answer, so they finally took a sheet and drew 4 squares and did water in one, electric in the other, plumbing in the other, and it was like very hard to get information. And you just get an inspector come out and tell you what you did wrong. And about half of the water district customers are paying online. That's incredible. Probably 40% at least. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Matt.
Thank you.
Discussion on case PZ 1-08, an appeal for landscaping and screening requirements for proposed assisted living facility.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm here tonight to present case PZ 108, and it's the appeal to the landscaping and screening requirements for the undergrounding of utilities on Broadway Avenue and Tomahawk Road. This is where the site is located, and currently it's zone CB1, local business zone, and it is located right here. It's 3 parcels, and they have been combined. As you can see, these are the 3 parcels, and there is another property on the top, on the north side, and on the west side, and they're also zone CB1. The power poles that they're requesting not to be undergrounded are these that are showing with the green circle, and they are requesting that they don't have to. They're supposed to extend the road. They're going to widen the road up to 34 feet. So they're going to pave 34 feet, and they're going to have 17 feet of right-of-way. So a total of 50 feet on that side. This is Broadway, by the way. This is looking at the east of the side, which is the northeast, and this pole they would have to underground as well. And this is not part of their property. This is Tomahawk Road, and these are the 2 that will have to be undergrounded on that side of the road, of their property. This is not part of their property as well. Only this one is. And they will be widening that street as well. This is what SRP, their survey that they gave the applicant, they provided them. So this is Broadway, and this is Tomahawk. These are the ones that are on their property. This one, and this one. These are the ones they're going to have to underground as well. And this is their site plan. They're currently, they're proposing to do an assisted living facility. Do you have any questions?
Any questions?
I think we have this on discussion later on the agenda about undergrounding utilities.
How many power poles are they saying to take down on Broadway?
On Broadway would be 3 if they have to underground them.
So if I remember correct, the last time this was brought up, these would be the only 3 taken down on the entire street.
That's correct, as of right now.
And the rest would stay there.
I think when we were discussing revising and relooking at this ordinance, I think they were looking at certain areas where we were concerned about the poles being visually, in the way of things. And if I'm not mistaken, just remembering here, I think that was like towards the downtown area and things of that nature.
It's item 10 on the agenda.
Was there any recommendation from SRP?
SRP recommended that they underground all of them, obviously. And it is, they're asking for several other properties as well. And it would be a hardship on the applicant.
38% increase on the job cost,
I'm not sure.
estimated.
Wouldn't
That's
they
a
also
huge
have to
increase.
go under, aren't they also talking about going under Tomahawk in order to do that? I mean,
That is to underground.
That's ludicrous.
They're
Yeah.
undergrounding Broadway
All the
and
way
Tomahawk.
across.
Correct.
Yeah, that's
Ludicrous.
ludicrous, is right.
And we have it on item 10 here for discussion on utilities.
Okay.
Hopefully we can come up with something there and
Jen.
determine.
Is this holding up this project at all?
Yes. This is what they're debating on, whether they're going to have a project or not.
When is this coming back to us?
April 1st.
Okay, we'll see what happens. Item 10.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. You want to be excused? Mrs. Barker will be excused for 7 and 8. Discussion on PW 2006-11-1, rubber gasket reinforcement concrete pipe bid. And that is,
Just for the record, Ms. Barker left due to a perceived conflict of interest.
okay.
And we'll get started. I've asked the Economic Development Director to give the macro context of this public-private partnership, and then we'll have David going to address just the detail of the pipes and whatnot.
Joel could help you out. Oh, that technology. Help them out. Yeah.
Next, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Good evening.
City Council. To sort of set the stage for you this evening, this is a public works project. However, it does have economic development implications, and it actually stems from a previous development agreement that we are a party to. There we go. A development agreement was entered into between the City of Apache Junction, between Parks Entertainment Enterprises Incorporated, and between Foothill Publishing. In the interest of full disclosure, Foothill Publishing is the parent organization of the Apache Junction News. Mr. Ed Barker is the principal, as Councilwoman Barker has recused herself on this matter. The item was approved on a unanimous vote in September of 2006. Robin was not a candidate for council. Robin was not serving on council. This was strictly a business development matter to revitalize a property on the trail. Under the development agreement, the city has two obligations: to obtain materials and install those materials. The private sector partners with us then have the responsibility to reimburse the city for the cost of the pipes and materials and to dedicate a public drainage easement. Economic considerations on this matter. You're going to see this slide a couple of times. First, we're going to talk about the public-private partnerships, and then we'll come back to these other points. So we're not skirting those, we're just going to be coming back to those. Under the public-private partnerships, these have been larger projects where we've actually worked with the local business community on Phelps Drive. It was through city initiatives there, in partnering with the private sector, that design work and landscape work was done. The aesthetics fund was used to help underground power lines on the Phelps Drive project. And to this day, we have an ongoing agreement that city crews maintain beyond city right-of-way and are reimbursed for that cost in front of those businesses to give us that very appealing look on the Phelps Drive improvements. Walmart Regional Drainage Project is another, was a $1.2 million project where the city reimbursed Walmart for fronting those costs and solving a regional problem. And most recently, the QT undergrounding of the power lines. Going back to the economic considerations on this matter, you see that it is certainly a council priority that we encourage business to revitalize and reinvest in our downtown area. In this particular case, the agreement helps two existing Apache Junction businesses either be retained in the community or expand within the community. From my own economic development experience, that's usually a sensitive matter in a community. Existing businesses will often say, why are you out recruiting and giving up the farm and you're not helping me grow or expand? Here is a case where councils previous to this one engaged and authorized the development agreement for us to partner on this cost-shared drainage improvement. The project also either rehabilitates or replaces an eyesore building, and if you think of what's right next to Dirtwater Springs, the empty barber shop is what Foothill Publishing will acquire. In speaking with Mr. Barker, his plans are either to, if he can, save approximately 600 square feet of that building to retain the old Western flavor, or if that becomes impractical from an engineering perspective, to clear the site, build a 3,000 square foot building that again would have a Western flair true to the community's ancestral traditions, architectural traditions. Altogether, that represents an approximately $500,000 private sector investment on that parcel. Finally, the item that supports this also and authorizes this is the infill incentive policy. And as I had briefed you when we talked about our downtown area, that's one of the areas where we've gone through a long list of things we said we were willing to help on, but we've not previously resourced. With that as background, I'll step aside and invite David Furnup to talk about the specifics of the bid and the staff recommendation.
And I need a little help with the thing here, but I'm going to just do a, this is one button. Very sophisticated. Good evening, Mayor and Council. David Fern, Public Works Director. Kind of tagging on to what the Economic Development Director just described. As he described the history and the commitment and the purpose of doing this project, when engineering looked at this, once we decided to go ahead with the project, we wanted to figure out, as part of that partnership effort, what engineering tried to figure out is the best way to do this in the most cost-effective way. So in order to do the work at the least cost and minimize some of the costs, we split it out into a couple of phases. The first phase is going to be a purchase of material and installation of head wall junction structure, access barriers, safety rail, and miscellaneous work. And that'll all be cost for the downtown businesses. The agreement states that the city will be responsible for the second phase. So we looked at it two ways. We wanted to split it out to make it real clean between what the businesses were paying for and what Public Works will be paying for. So the second phase of the contract will be for us, for the city to come in, do all the backfill work, and pave the surface above the pipes. When we advertised for a bid, the RGRCP pipe material purchase came in at, we had several bids, but the range of the bids came in between $60,000 and $86,000. We're selecting the lowest, most responsive bidder for the pipe, and that would be a Hanson Pipe and Precast. They were the lowest, most responsive bidder. While that pipe is being fabricated in Texas, I understand, that's going to take about 6 weeks. We're going to award the second contract to H.W. Johnson. What they're going to be doing is installing head walls, junction structures, and barriers. Probably taking about a month to mobilize, but the hope is to have the structural part of the contract constructed by the time the pipe materials start arriving 6 weeks later. So for both of those contracts, total cost to the business merchants is $81,000 and $81,061. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Yes.
Hey, Dave, I just a little curious on the second bid. You've got bids ranging from $18,000 to $88,000. And in our packet, you said that the $18,000 didn't really, meet everything that requirements that we needed. And we're going to go with H.W. Johnson Incorporated for $20,261. I was just curious as to how or why the difference from 20 to 88, or the difference between the first one is a little bit more realistic. For the pipe was between 60 to 80,000, basically.
It appears to me that a number of the contractors chose to incorporate the pipe work with the work that we are bidding out separately for the head walls. So I noticed a couple of the bids kind of included both the head wall work and the pipe work. But the reason we bid it separately is so we could minimize the cost. And of course, if we purchase it, well, a good example on the savings is if it's done as one bid, you lose the 10%, or a contractor will typically put 10 or 15% overhead on the materials. So by doing them separately, we save $6,000 or $7,000 for the business merchants by bidding them separately. What I suspect happened on that part of it was some of the contractors may not have wanted to do the work if they were just going to get a small portion of it. Right. They bid them together. That's why there was such a wide.
So that's why the 88,000 is
right. And then on the other issue, H.W. Johnson was the second lowest bidder, but the apparent low bidder made a mistake in his bid documents, so they were rejected because they weren't the lowest, most responsive bidder.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I don't have a question, I have a comment though. I remember when I first got on the council back in the mid-90s, this was an issue for the current property owner. Regardless of whether he owned it or not, he was willing to do something like this, and it took us years to finally come up with a development agreement. It's a safety issue too, and there's benefits to getting that wash cleared and having it a paved area, not just an aesthetic. There was some safety issues too, I know, when we made our decision on it.
Absolutely. When you drive down that corridor, it's the only location along the north side of that corridor that has a wash that is protected by a railing to prevent people from stepping off into it. So
we've had lawsuits on that before.
We had one in front of AutoZone years ago.
Just because of the situation. But I think it's, like what Steve said, I think it's a good idea to help. If there's anyone who's stated they want some help, it's the owner of Dirtwater, and I think that it is good to help your current businesses stay alive and help them enhance. If there's a way we can do that, it's not costing the public money.
yeah, so like I said, if you look at the corridor, it's one of the it's the only location that has a wide wash
On the north side. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, that takes care of 7 and 8. Discussion on proposed ordinance number 1317, establishing traffic control at 16th Avenue and Winchester Road. Robin? There she is.
Okay, for Winchester Road and 16th Avenue stop signs, staff is recommending approval of ordinance 1317 to install stop signs in the eastbound and westbound directions at the intersection of 16th Avenue and Winchester Road, as required by city code. Anytime we make a change to traffic control, we've got to do it through ordinance. And at this particular location, there were, I know the questions come up a couple of times, does it meet warrant? And for this stop sign situation, we utilize a manual called the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And in that manual, it describes typically guidelines that you would use for traffic signals, any traffic control element. For this particular intersection, the warrants, and I passed out a memo that describes the engineering study that we did, but this particular intersection doesn't meet the specific warrants that are described in the MUTCD, but there's something that's an important distinction that needs to be made is the MUTCD is a guideline that describes different conditions that shall be met, should be met, or may be met. So especially for stop signs, you want to really take a close look at what the surrounding conditions are whenever you analyze an intersection to see if you want to install a stop sign. In this particular one, the optional practices that you look at when it may not specifically warrant by traffic numbers, by accidents, if there's conditions like that that don't warrant per the guidelines of MUTCD for stop lines, then there's other things that you look at when you're trying to determine whether it's
like close calls, very close calls.
Exactly. The
There's
warrant,
been a lot of them there, yes.
the warrant is 5 accidents, and we all don't want to wait until there's 5 accidents at an intersection before we look at it real closely. So we did an engineering study on it, and our recommendation is to install the stop sign. And one of the reasons we went out and evaluated what the intersection looks like. I don't know if you can see this on the overhead or not. But one of the optional considerations that you're supposed to apply engineering judgment to when you're making these determinations is if there's line of sight problems or if there's turning movement restrictions or other reasons where you need to be concerned about controlling that intersection. And in my view, it really is an intersection where there's some visibility issues. This is looking eastbound down 16th Avenue. And as as you can see, if that traffic goes straight through at that intersection, they wouldn't have to be going very fast for someone to pull out in front.
Because that's actually Hondo there, that changes there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's Hondo. 16th Avenue stops at Winchester.
Yes.
And then it turns into Hondo. Okay.
Yeah, so, and we got a similar situation over on the northeast corner where if you're going southbound on Winchester and you're looking eastbound, if people park over on the north side of the road, which, you know, people are going to do that, it's not posted for no parking. So, you know, based on those kind of considerations, we really thought that even though there might be a little bit of inconvenience by installing the eastbound, westbound stop signs, the benefit that you gain from the safety more than justifies the install. So we're recommending that stop sign installation. With that, I'd be happy to answer.
Well, the road's, Your Honor, the road's extremely wide.
It's very wide.
Especially west of the intersection. So if you're heading east, I think the speed limit's 25. Most cars aren't doing 25. You know, the wider the road, the easier it is to just...
When I was out there taking pictures this morning in preparation for this presentation, the guy came out from the corner and said there's been all kinds of close calls at that intersection, and he's hoping that we would seriously consider installing the stop sign.
Yeah, all the residents, residents wanted over there. Remember when we had the neighborhood meeting to talk about the palm trees?
Yeah.
After that was talked over, everybody wanted to talk about this intersection, and so it's definitely wanted by the residents.
I wish it was this simple on 88 and Superstition Boulevard.
Yeah, really. That's got to be the most unsafe intersection in the city.
The difference between the stop sign warrants and the traffic signal warrants are there's some standards and shall requirements on because of the potential.
Why don't we put stop signs on the 88?
But then you're dealing with the state.
But we're actually going to look at that a little bit closer using today's numbers.
I certainly hope we can. It needs to be done.
But there is some liability associated with traffic signals that are much more stringent than stop signs.
I came out of here about a month ago, and there was a T-bone right there again. It's like, I hate that intersection. It's a 45. You're looking this way, and it's horrible.
We're going to look at it again, but as you know, that's a ADOT controlled intersection, or it's a ADOT maintained corridor. So
we need to sound our voice.
We'll have to coordinate with the ADOT on the warrant studies here.
Our voice of concern, we need to sound on that one.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks.
Discussion on amending utility undergrounding ordinance. Here you are. Brad, there you go.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Brad Stanky, Development Services Director. Back in November, council looked at a number of items. This is on your work program. And one of the items that you asked us to move forward with and do some research on was the undergrounding of utilities. You presently have an ordinance which I think does a fairly good job of creating criteria by which you make decisions and the city makes decisions. However, you were not terribly pleased with that ordinance or those criteria, so you asked us to take a look at maybe fine-tuning it to try to create some regulations and standards that give us the biggest bang for our buck. If we are to require undergrounding, where are the best places in the city to do that? And how can we be sensitive to the impact of requiring this on the private pocketbook? So what we did, and what I did was, I went out and actually drove this city. I wanted to find areas where it was very clear where undergrounding was important and where the opportunity was meaningful. But what I found really was a patchwork where you had utility wires here on the road, not here, here, not here. And there wasn't really a whole lot of, I guess, a whole pattern by which we could draw some firm conclusions. Some of the good news is most of Apache Trail is underground, and that's the area that you really were concerned about. There are a few parts of the city that are very visible that we probably want to continue to focus on for future undergrounding, but there really wasn't a pattern by which it made it easy for us to create a standard, to create a future for this. So what we've done is created an ordinance here. It's not perfect, but it's a start for you to take a look at and see, is this something that's worthwhile? Is this something that we should continue on and send to Planning and Zoning Commission, and then have it returned back to you. What it does is it tries to identify what parts of the city are important for us. And we said those major arterials are important. Those are the major roads that people drive along. We also said that it was important for us to take a look at the integrity of the area. The properties next door to it, are they or can they be put underground, or does it look like those properties are going to have overhead wires forever and ever? What about the neighborhood in general, beyond just the adjacent properties? And so what we came back with was an ordinance, and I should say that while in the ordinance itself it talks about major arterials, we would fine-tune that to say there are some other roads in the city, some other areas that are not classified technically as major arterials that we may want to add to that list. I think one of the council members said earlier, Crossroads was the focus of what we wanted to do out here. So maybe we want to place Crossroads, the Crossroads redevelopment area, as a separate area that we ought to take a look at. The Old West Highway, State Route 88, and Apache Trail. Those areas, in addition to the arterials, I think are the important parts of the city that we would like you to take a look at. So we're suggesting that this be applied, again, to only the 12 kV lines or less, right? That there's a certain width of property, 150 feet or less, that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us to deal with on it. Again, that it applies to those areas I just mentioned, and it applies only to frontage. Right now, the ordinance is a blanket ordinance for the whole city, and it also requires the side and the rear of the properties to be underground. We're saying the frontage properties are the most important, the most visible. So the thing we put in place here for you to take a look at is allowing staff the opportunity, under certain circumstances, to hear an argument from a property owner, developer, and there's a number of criteria that we put into this ordinance, one being that if, and the way this is worded, it makes it very easy, you may be troubled by this, but it makes it very easy for staff to grant an exemption if one of these things applies, and here's what they are. Very briefly, if the adjacent land on both sides of the property in question is developed and has wires, all right? If it's developed and not likely to redevelop, there's a good chance that those wires aren't going to come down for a long time. I think you had an example of that tonight when someone raised that particular issue. Next criteria, that the character of the existing development within the immediate area, not just the adjacent area, but surrounding it, has a dominant pattern of existing overhead utility wires that, again, would appear that are going to be there for a while. Third one, that the proposed development, redevelopment is a minor addition and modification to an existing site or building. That isn't in the present ordinance. I think that's important because if someone wants to add on a couple hundred square feet to their building, we may want to encourage that, but we may not want to open the book on them to spend thousands of dollars for the overhead wires. If it's a small subdivision, here it says 2 lots or less. Could be 4 lots. Where you draw the line is something we can talk about. And again, that balancing act between the developer showing us that undergrounding these wires will be an unusual economic hardship, and the benefit of the aesthetics to the city is disproportionate to their cost, especially when or if this development, and we're really talking about redevelopment here, those are the properties that suffer the most from this impact, that if those properties really can show us that with this requirement, they will not invest or reinvest in the city. I think that's important for us to know as well. Now, what we're saying is any new utility extension from an existing line to a new building, residence, or commercial development, that line has to be underground. Any new streets, we're looking at the south side of 60, all that state land, any new streets has to be underground. So primarily here we're dealing with the idea of redevelopment in areas that have already been developed, and we're trying to make it a more aesthetically pleasing environment, but not in such a way that's overly burdensome. We've done another thing that's important here. We've said, staff, development services director, or my designee can make these decisions. If the property owner is unhappy with it, they can go to, well, it says here the hearing officer. We don't know if that's going to end up being part of this discussion, but if not, then I suspect the Board of Adjustment, Joel, is where they will end up if they're aggrieved or don't like the decision of the development services director on that. That then takes out of your hands, this is something you have to decide, is this good or bad, takes out of your hands this, this position you take in hearing these people come to you and making those decisions. So we've established some criteria. I think we've reduced the hammer of this ordinance. You have to judge whether or not that is reduced to the point that it goes too far, or if it's a decent balance between the public and private interests here. So with that, tomorrow night this is scheduled for direction to staff. If you decide to have us go further with this, we will then take it to P&Z, we'll have them talk about it, we'll come back to you, and you can fine-tune it even further with the hope of getting something going fairly soon.
Your Honor.
Is there any questions?
Brad, what we deal with is just like item 6 tonight, and that's primarily what we dealt with, is all the infill projects and the cost and burden on those. And I haven't seen one of them except for, I think, the Quick Trip that's worked, and that's because there was some money in some SRP, aesthetic fund. Otherwise, it's been like this, and this item 6, where they're going to build or they're not going to build due to the extreme cost of doing the undergrounding of utilities. And if you ask the SRP, their recommendation to me was no on undergrounding. They would much rather have it above ground so they can get access to the wiring to their utilities. That's what we've dealt with on all but one project. I think we've just done the waiver because it's been too much. But what we've done is we've taken a developer and we've just extended it and made it more difficult for them, and it just didn't. We didn't realize costs, I don't think, when we passed the ordinance. We just thought it was a good thing. So I agree when we go, especially down south, and you're going to new area, and there's already undergrounding, and they're extending the line. But if the line's going past the property already, it's been nothing but a burden. And I think a lot of citizens look at that and say, oh, you've given the developer something else now. And they look at it like we're giving tax incentives or something. And it's like, no, I think we created an ordinance that we didn't know what we were getting into. So how would this apply, could you say, to item 6, if we were to accept this?
Well, let me say that based on my understanding of item 6 and the neighborhood, this ordinance, if approved ultimately, would provide the means for Development Services Director or his designee to say exempt on that particular property. The pieces are there to allow that to happen. Now, I don't know about the larger area around it, but in that immediate area, I think that this ordinance would give staff the ability to say you're exempt.
John?
Although, doesn't that depend on the timing of passage of this ordinance?
Right. Let's just say that, magic wand, this was approved today. I think they would have standing to be exempt.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes.
Where?
Brad, this is a perfect example of what you do every time we ask you to work on an ordinance. You've brought back all the certain stipulations that would make this thing reasonable. Based on what you guys have come up with, this thing makes sense. Finally. Back in November, I had suggested that we get rid of this ordinance until this day comes. Until you've reworked it and brought it back so it works. If that had happened, these people wouldn't be delayed on their project today and having to come before us again. I hope that we can make this happen as soon as possible and get this project moving forward. But we need to start thinking, if an ordinance doesn't work, let's get rid of it until we fix it, instead of keeping it in effect until it gets fixed, which we all know can take several months to do. We have businesses out there that are being held up because we haven't decided if something is good enough or not. And it needs to change.
Anything else? Thanks, Brad. We'll see that tomorrow. discussion on creating administrative relief exemption from certain zoning code standards. Brad, this is you again?
Yes. This gets to that discussion about creating zoning discretion, creating some sort of staff administrative discretion that isn't so hard and fast, that isn't so black and white. As you recall, zoning as a tool is very specific, and you or society has done that on purpose to try to prevent administrative beings like myself from having too much discretion and varying from the ordinances that you put in place. This, however, is an example, not a novel example, an example of some other communities. This has been time-tested, it's been around a while. Usually this administrative relief goes in the range of 5 to 10%. It allows staff to take proposed development, this isn't development that's occurred already, but planned development, and if appropriate, under certain circumstances, be able to waive or modify some of the area standards, not use, but area standards like setbacks, building height, site coverage, sign height, open space, number of parking stalls, by 10%. Now, the example we give in here in your report is if there's a 10-foot setback requirement for a house or a shed, and they come in and they say, well, here's the reasons why it doesn't work for our property and it meets this criteria, we could reduce it to 9 feet. The theory being that reducing it a foot or 10% doesn't destroy or undermine the integrity of the zoning code. I don't know if the average person can eyeball 9 feet versus 10 feet.
Right.
If you start to go further, then it becomes an issue. Where you draw that line is an interesting exercise, but most communities that do this, it's in the 5 to 10% area. So in here again, we give some criteria that we'd want to be able to set apart to some degree property, but it's fairly, and Joe will not like me saying this, but I think it is fairly relaxed standards that if it makes sense to do this, if it doesn't affect the neighbors, if it doesn't affect the city's purse, if it doesn't undermine the integrity of the zoning code, that we could go ahead and do this, okay? This is not going to solve dramatic issues where people have, want half of the requirement. It won't do that. Those continue to be the zoning board of adjustment in our current setup. So I don't know that I have to say much more about this. I think that it makes some sense. The only thing that I guess we want to fine-tune a little bit more is it required for us to have to go out and notice the neighbors of these matters. If there are administrative changes, there is a notice requirement, and you start to involve some more paperwork and some more processing. But that's something I think that we'll talk with staff about before it comes back to you guys. But otherwise, I think this is a fairly straightforward ordinance.
10%, yeah.
Brad?
Yes.
Would it be possible to pass that, I'll say, notification onto the developer, saying that if they came in and say this won't fit my property and we'd like to go for the 9-foot setback, one of their requirements is that they would go out to the neighbors and get statements from them saying this is acceptable to them. That way it's not passing a burden onto the city to go out after this.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Wilson, we do that for other items like conditional use permits, and we require properties be notified within 300 feet, and they have to come up with the list. So it's possible. We can talk about that. This will go to the Planning and Zoning Commission because it is a change of a zoning ordinance. So we can certainly bring that up with them.
I would.
Yes.
I assume that the developer, whoever was asking for the waiver, would be doing a phase much like a rezoning or something. It's a zoning change. So.
This, the 5 to 10% rule works. What about the other portion that we've discussed earlier? Based on the undergrounding of the power line ones that we just came up with, it's based on certain criteria. Staff would be able to make the exemption. Will we be able to place the same wording into this ordinance based on certain criteria? Staff could make an exemption or an exception for other items.
Other items that aren't listed here?
This one is all for planned development.
Yes.
What about something that is already there?
Well, we had that discussion. Originally, we came out with an ordinance that said, okay, should it be pre-construction and post-construction? What if some contractor makes an error and he builds it 9 feet rather than 10 feet?
Exactly.
Can we wave this 10% magic wand and say you're okay? And I think the response, in my research from other communities, it's always been pre-construction. That's all I've ever seen.
Right.
And I think, Joel, that you have probably a comment about that as well.
Yes, that's because of the zoning code under 9-462. It delineates certain things that you can change and that will require notice to the property owners. It's going to be more than 10%, then you would have to notify the property owners.
Okay.
Same with setbacks. It talks about setbacks and height limitations of 10%. And that's, I think, why this thing's in existence in most cities, or in a lot of cities. And that's why, and that's how you can do it, and that's only for, once again, this would only be for things that have not been built yet.
Can you do it? The question is, can we do it for things that have been built? Could we look backwards with this ordinance?
If we can wave this magic 10% wand for something that's going to be built, is there any reason why we couldn't waive it for something that was built by mistake?
I don't think so. I think that would be variance, and that would come under the authority of the Board of Adjustment currently. And that is under state law.
Okay, unless we added wording into this that would cover that.
But then you would violate 9-462, which is the law. So you cannot abrogate. There is one way to do it.
And how is that?
There is one way you can do this. You can create a charter that would change 9-462. That is a possibility, but that will take a long time. That's a very lengthy process.
Or we could appoint a hearing officer.
No, well, that doesn't solve the problem either. The problem that you're looking for, to apply this to existing buildings. But yes, you can change, the only way you can change 9-462, the only legal way is to create a charter that does that. And that is a very lengthy process. I'm not prepared tonight to go through the process, but essentially you have to appoint, I forget what they call them, it's using old constitutional language.
Board of Freeholders.
Freeholders, thank you. And it could take months and months and months to do that.
Years.
It could take, and there's a lot of community discussions. I don't recommend that, but that legally, you could do that.
Okay. If this is the case, then wasn't the entire point of this whole discussion missed? I thought that we were bringing up staff discretion on enforcement of items that have already happened and appeals processes. That's what I thought this was about.
No, I didn't. No.
I'm not sure that was what we were getting from the council when the council directed this.
I thought it was for them.
It was all brought up about Rita, which was never new. This whole thing about staff discretion was, how can we allow a staff member to apply discretion or common sense to try to help somebody who is in a situation of a mistake or a setback violation? That's what this all started over.
I think we did talk about the discretionary issue, and I think I did say that would violate 9-462, which is state law.
Unless we appointed a hearing officer and they appealed it to a hearing officer who would have the same authority as the Board of Adjustment and maybe $100 instead of $750.
That's the next agenda.
That's on the next item, and we can certainly get there if you want to move there now.
Is that all for Brad?
They go hand in hand, don't
No.
they?
Okay, Brad, you got the next one. Discussion on creating a hearing officer in lieu of Board of Adjustment.
And I think this topic is the one that comes closest to what you were just talking about, Councilman, and that is, can there be a staff person who can look at any of the zoning criteria or any of the property maintenance, and let's expand it, any issue that Development Services has under its umbrella, and can a staff person somehow waive or modify requirements, pre-construction, post-construction, if, in their opinion, it doesn't do whatever the criteria is, harm the neighborhood,
Create a safety hazard.
And that's where some of you started out with this issue. Very clearly, we understand the intent of some of you was to try to create that, and I'm going to use this word, this logical, common sense approach to managing our zoning code. And we really did start that way. We started talking about who could this magical person be, and how could they somehow be judicious in doing these waivers and so forth. And as we worked through this, I mean, I looked at other communities. I tried to find some example of where a staff person, or any person for that matter, could do something differently, more quickly, less expensively, and maybe with a little more flexibility than the Board of Adjustment. I have not been able to find that community as an example. We did find communities that had a hearing officer. So we put that on your list of different zoning flexibility elements. You know, we had PD ordinance, we had Board of Adjustments, we had this relief, and then we had a hearing officer, not really understanding or knowing how that might help us, but it sounded like it might. Well, as we do more research then, we come to find out that the hearing officers are used primarily in communities, and I say it here in my memo, where there's a heavy workload and they try to expedite it, and the hearing officer may be able to come in and work every day for that matter rather than once a month like Board of Adjustment. But as we looked further and further at this, it became apparent, and I'll let Joel speak for himself, that this hearing officer really cannot follow any different rule than the Board of Adjustment with respect to the standards that the state, through going all the way back to when zoning was created, what those standards, what those requirements are. And beyond that, the duties are similar to Board of Adjustment. The due process, which is another issue. What must we do for notification? Must we notify everybody like Board of Adjustment? Must we comply with the requirements of the $500 advertising fee or whatever that is? And who would be this person? And the way this came out of staff was that this person is essentially the same as the Board of Adjustment, except 7 people. It's 1 person. How many at Board of Adjustment?
7.
Is it 5? 7?
7.
5 to 7. And they have to look at these decisions like the Board of Adjustment, and I've sort of put in my memo here what the criteria is, generally speaking. And there's a lot of interpretation in there. You know, you look at that and you could see how you could come to different decisions if you're a Board of Adjustment member or a hearing officer. And then one more thing was put in here, and that was that it not be a staff member, because again, our tradition has been to be administrative and just impart the rules that you create, but that it be an outside appointed person that the city manager appoints that comes in and does this function. So I know this falls short of where you wanted to go with this, but I think we are guided by the law, and Joel can further explain that if there's a question about that. But I think that's what some of you are looking for, and I don't think that does what you want it to do. But I've searched and I've looked, and I can't find an example of how that can work.
Brad, I didn't think it would. I really didn't think a hearing officer would make a difference over Board of Adjustments because they follow the same rules. The only thing I did hear about the hearing officer is I didn't realize the expense of the Board of Adjustments compared to a hearing officer. And that hasn't been said yet, right? Rather, how much the hearing officer would cost.
We can talk with the city clerk about it. The one question is it the same sort of cost as Board of Adjustment? Is it even more if we hire an outside person and bring that person in? Mm-hmm. And then you have a policy decision, should we subsidize? Even though it may cost X amount of money, should the city subsidize this cost and basically internalize those costs? Those are policy decisions. But as far as the required costs.
The publication costs,
yeah.
That's mandated by state law.
Then we're not saving anything.
The only thing we'd be saving would be time, right? Because
not much.
I think we can move it generally quicker, but we're not being, flooded with applications right now. So that hasn't been a problem at this point.
I thought in our last discussion that it would not be advertising if we were issuing a variance, not a rezoning. If we are giving an exception There's no advertising for that. We had to notify the neighbors, but it wouldn't have to be advertised.
Mr. Severs, I think it'd be the same process as the Board of Adjustment, because the statute simply doesn't address that issue. And because it doesn't, I think you have to use the same process as the Board of Adjustment. All it says is the city council can appoint a hearing officer in lieu of a Board of Adjustment in the first instance. And if someone didn't agree with the hearing officer, well, they get to go to the Board of Adjustment. You would still have the Board of Adjustment, assuming you still wanted members who wanted to serve on it.
Exactly. After having a hearing officer, I don't think
that's correct.
They're going to continue. I won't want to be on the Board of Adjustments. You're going to have a hearing officer. What's the sense?
When I read these stipulations, the stipulations here, there are special circumstances or conditions applicable to the property referred to in the application which do not prevail on other properties in that zone. That tells me that if there are certain circumstances that would not allow this zone to be enforced or zone to be applied, forget the word I'm looking for here, if it doesn't fit in this case, that would be eligible for a variance. The strict application of the regulations would work as an unnecessary hardship. That right there would be a reason for an exception or an exemption.
That is the same standard that the Board of Adjustment would look at.
Exactly. And one person could make that decision, couldn't he? One person could look over the findings of this investigation and go, you know what, this fits here. This cannot work according to our code.
They would take the place of the Board of Adjustment. That is correct. You'd still have to have the public hearing on it. You'd still have, you'd have to have a hearing on it so the neighbors are notified. It's still the same process. So you would save time in that it's not once a month. You could call up the hearing officer and say, hey, come on over. We've got to.
You'd have to pre-advertise.
You'd have to pre-advertise, yes, but it's not just once a month.
Right.
And, I don't know what kind of hearing officer you want. Do you want someone who knows the area of planning? Do you want an attorney to do it? Do you want, who would you want? Do you want a city manager to do it? I recommended that the city manager appoint the person so that it's not left to the Development Services Director, because he's kind of in the line of firing, basically. When his decision, that would be appealed to the hearing officer.
That would be somebody outside the city of Apache Junction.
I would recommend that. Do you have to? Well, the statute doesn't say. But I would recommend, to avoid conflicts of interest, allegations of corruption or dysfunctional activities, that it be someone else outside the city.
I personally, Your Honor, I think if it's going to be one or the other, it's not working the way that the intent was. If we don't like the way the decisions are making by the Board of Adjustments, and when those terms come up, then we find people that have the same philosophy as we do, because this isn't saving the citizen any money. It's not really going to save them any time, and you're going to have somebody who probably is going to follow the book a whole lot more than your fellow neighbors or citizens.
All right. My question is, and we just went over this on item number 11, and it says here the types of zoning standards that would be subject to an exception. We're talking about changing zoning or giving exceptions to the zoning in item number 11 by way of certain criteria and possibly a hearing officer. I'd like to know what is the difference between item number 11 and item number 12.
Number 11 gives you up to a certain percentage. For example, 10%.
Because we said.
No, because of the statutory, the interpretation under 9-462 that talks about how you change a certain height, and it talks about the 10%.
Okay, and we couldn't say in a city of Apache Junction, we're going to give this person up to 20%?
No.
We couldn't do that?
No, that would be in violation of 9-462.
Okay, so we came up with the 10% on that one.
Yes. Setbacks and height restrictions also.
In zoning changes?
Yes.
Without the advertising, without the $750 fee?
Well, like Brad and I are going to be talking about that, because that's That might be an issue also.
There's still going to be notification.
Notification doesn't cost much to
What
send
you
out to
need
the
is-
300-foot
is,
club.
For one, we have to do the $500 statutory requirement, and for the 10%, we don't.
Let me clear that up. The code requires a deposit of, I think, $500. But any money that's left over from that deposit goes back to the applicant. By the same token, if it's more than $500, they have to pay the difference.
So it could cost over $750 to be able to practice your right to an appeal.
Well, okay, I'm not going to touch that one. But
Well, could it?
from the practical standpoint, in the instance of, let's say, a rezoning, where somebody's coming in to rezone a piece of property, you've got your legal, pre-hearing legal advertising costs, and the statute also says if there's a law enacted on behalf of that party, they have to pay the publication cost of the law. So you have a developer who would be required to pay the publication costs 4 times. Statute requires 4-time publication of an ordinance. That could be in the thousands,
Right.
depending on the size of the ordinance, but that's a rezoning.
Right.
For a board case, it would be less than that because you're not publishing an ordinance. You don't, a board case is simply a pre-hearing notice, which I would venture is $250, somewhere in that range. So, but there would be no corresponding ordinance because the Board of Adjustment does not adopt ordinances.
And the flexibility you have would be the fee for, not the publication cost, but the fee for the actual hearing officer.
Yes.
And like Brad was saying, if you wanted to subsidize it, you certainly can do that if you'd like. No city that I've ever seen does that.
So we have no way to help somebody who cannot afford an appeal.
Well, that is well, when it comes to publication costs, no. You could have a program that would be basically an indigency program, and they would have to come up with what they make, and if they can prove that they are below the minimum on low income. We did that, for example, with the Chapter 9 revisions. We have a program that allows that for certain screening and landscaping.
I thought that we had a provision for elderly, disabled, handicapped, or low income.
That's part of it also, that's correct. And that would probably save the person on the fee for the city costs for bringing in the hearing officer. The publication cost, the statute says the applicant shall pay.
If we'd create this position, would this person be accessible to the public? I could see situations where they'd be very heavily lobbied in order to be seen their point of view, so.
Well, that person would still be acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. If you're talking about number 12, right, item number 12.
Yes.
And so, can people call the Board of Adjustment members now? Well, they do. And should the Board of Adjustment members talk to them? Probably not, because they're acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. I mean, suppose someone could call them saying, hey, how are you gonna rule on this thing?
And here's why I think you should rule on it, because of this,
Right.
and then everyone starts, you know,
Lobbying.
And that kind of blows the whole point of having a hearing on it. So I don't recommend, I mean, and we could tell hearing officers don't talk to anybody, but human nature is they're going to. You can try not. Some Board of Adjustment members do not talk to anybody who's an applicant. They just won't call them back. And that is a good thing. Because remember, the appeal of the Board of Adjustment, the next step, and this city doesn't have 100,000 people yet, but once it does, the city council would be the appellate board. Currently, the next step is the court. And that's Superior Court, and judges can do a lot more things than a Board of Adjustment. They could order sanctions for violating the quasi-judicial issues. They can do a lot more things. So it gets a little more expensive once you go to the next appeal.
Right.
Is there any more for Brad?
I have one more thing.
Okay.
I think we all know up here who this discussion is about. And when this lady came forward, I've been trying to help her for a year. And Ari, you called me the next day and said, what can we do to help this lady? We need to do something. And Robin, you directed staff, you know, hey, let's see what we can do to help this lady. And Johnny, you went to her house and said, gee, something needs to be done about this. With all of us wanting, and Chip, you were there, I've been there, with all of us wanting to help this lady, if we would work together on this, there's got to be something.
Something within the law. We're not going to break the law. We're not going to change the law.
This would actually cost her more money if she went this route.
We can
Board of Adjustment.
change the law if we want to give staff more flexibility. There's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. You can't tell me that this law, here's what it says, no matter what, this is the way it is. That doesn't work that way. There's got to be a way to help this lady. If we would work together and actually try to help, I know we could. I know we could.
Well, you said, Joe, when I asked you, you said you were going to do it that Saturday, and I said, what help do you need? And I'm
Yeah,
going to
help-
get a backhoe and a welder, and
Help
I've
as
heard
in
that a
moving
number
it
of
or
times.
tearing it down. That's $6,000 to $8,000. That's a lot of work. That's another permit process that she's got to go through.
Well, at least it's legal. This, if she goes this route, it doesn't mean she's going to
Mr. Mayor, I think we're
Yes.
off the agenda.
What happens
Yes.
to the next person?
Thank you, Brad. We're done. We're adjourned.